Everyone, Ollie here, and before I get into my review of Ghostlight, I just want to make my special announcement that I teased earlier on my channel. So, after I complete my classic series reviews, I will be doing a series of videos, so it will be a short series, and this series will be based on the Cartmore Master Plan. And one of the videos will be explaining what it is and how it would have impacted season 27. What would season 27 have been like with the Cartmore master plan and everything in place? And I'll probably will do a follow up video after this series exploring what Doctor Who would have been like in the 90s. And I have been thinking of what could have possibly happened if Doctor Who hadn't been cancelled and season 26, and how it would have been like in the 90s if the BBC had actually giving it a chance. And I do have some very good ideas that I'm very excited to share with you, and I can't wait to get that out whenever I get to that. And I also plan on doing an analysis of the Cartmore Master Plan versus the Timeless Child, because I remember shortly after the Timeless Child aired, I think there were a lot of comparisons drawn with the Cartmore Master Plan because they both involved the identities of the Doctor. And my last thing is that I will also be finally getting onto my Scream reviews. That's something I've been teasing for quite some time, and I definitely want to get started on it before I get onto the Wilderness Years of Doctor Who, which I'll obviously be talking about the TV movie and some aspects of the Wilderness Years, and this will be before I jump into New Who, which I'll probably won't do until at least the new year to kick things off. So stay tuned for those and enjoy my review of Ghostlight. To the main event, Ghostlight, the second story of the 26th season of classic Doctor Who, starring Sylvester McCoy as the 7th Doctor. Ghostlight is the 157th story overall. It's 3 parts long and it's written by Mark Platt. And Mark Platt is a very well known contributor to the expanded media of Doctor Who, especially during the Wilderness years, and he wrote some Virgin New Adventures novels, including the controversial Long Barrow. So the plot of Ghostlight is as follows. London, 1983. An old house mysteriously burns to the ground. 100 years earlier, the Doctor and Ace arrive at a sinister mansion in the rural hamlet of Perivale. Horrors old and new await the Doctor amongst the peculiar residents of Gabriel Chase. But it is Ace who must confront her own worst nightmares when she discovers that her past and the house's future are inextricably linked. So that is the plot of Ghostlight. So Ghostlight is a story that has its fair share of detractors because they feel as if the plot is very confusing to understand. But personally, I really do enjoy Ghostlight. Though yes, I do agree that the plot is unclear at times, but I do think it's a cleverly written story that serves its purpose as both a plot-driven story and a character-driven story, and which might need a few rewatches. And the first rewatch will probably can come after watching this season to fully grasp the vision that Platt was trying to convey for this story and how well it fits in with the long game in terms of the Cartmel master plan. The production was quite good. Ghostlight was all filmed in studio, so no location shoots, but the Gabriel Chase set looked brilliant, and it was very gothic, and it actually reminded me of the Philip Hinchcliffe era, especially when he was producing for Doctor Who in the Tom Baker era. And of course, this was actually mentioned in a lot of the special features that the period dramas that the BBC can do exceptionally well because they really put an effort into making their sets look like something from like the period it was set in. But then I think the set of Ghostlight ship looked great also. The special effects was quite good, although it was quite iffy in some places, such as Light trying to change or trying to like prevent the change from happening by really but not preventing his ship from leaving, but then ends up killing him, of course. And Ghostlight does have the distinction of being the last ever Classic Who story ever filmed. The script was quite good, as was the direction by Alan Waring. The plot is a bit confusing, but I did understand the major gist of what this message was trying to convey, and I was able to decipher it somehow with my own understanding. And I had to, even I did kind of cheat a bit, but then I actually did read an article of what Ghostlight was trying to achieve, and the message of Ghostlight was was before I actually watched Ghostlight, so it does make things a lot clearer. But truth be told, if you do have an understanding of the Darwin's theory of evolution and obviously how people are against the whole theory. Oh shit, there's a wasp. So yeah, sorry about that. There was a wasp in my room. I don't really like wasps. Or does anyone like wasps? So yeah, so what I was on about was your understanding of Darwin's theory of evolution can help you understand the plot of Ghostlight. But I will attach a link to the description to in description about the article I read of Ghostlight. So Ghostlight is basically about change and survival of the fittest, which was season 26's recurring theme, or mini recurring theme. So the message of survival is interwoven with Darwin's theory of evolution, which was actually referenced quite a few times in the story, and basically the conflict with Light and everyone else's, and Light's general MO is that Light, who is portrayed as an angelic sort of character, but he's a stubbornly old man who's hesitant to change and doesn't want to change, and didn't like how the whole world was changing, and because it was pretty much evolving, and he was evolving himself, but he didn't realize it, and he didn't like the fact that he was changing, and anyone that dared question this, he would pretty much turn them into stone or turn them into primordial soup or whatever. And that change ended up being his downfall, and his hesitance to change and his was the evil that Ace had sensed in Gabriel Chase when she was 13 years old. And then we also have Control. She was another part of Light's conflict, and Control was initially a part of Light's survey team, and she was like this greyish old crone, but then she evolves into a beautiful young woman, and at the end of the story, she goes off to travel the universe with Redverse and Nimrod and with Josiah captured. And Josiah himself, he was a part of the survey team, but he evolved into a Victorian gentleman. And we also have Nimrod, a Neanderthal from the prehistoric era that ended up in Victorian London thanks to Light. And he pretty much evolved into, even though he still looked the same, but then his mindset actually evolved as well because he was speaking normally compared to other Neanderthals. I'm pretty sure they lacked speech as well. To summarize, in order to survive, you need to possess the willpower to adapt to evolve and adapt to your surroundings. Because if you don't, you probably get left behind. You can end up dying because the whole gist of survival of the fittest means that only the strong survive and the weak don't. And you don't need to rely on your physical strength. You need to rely on your mental strength and your willpower as well. And I think the conflict of the story is also a metaphor for the main issue Doctor Who slash John Nathan Turner they were both facing in the 1980s, or at least the 80s in general. Because Doctor Who needed to change in most of the 80s, it felt very much the same. And when Doctor Who was on the 18-month hiatus, and after it returned with Trial of a Time Lord, things were still very much the same, and Doctor Who didn't actually evolve. And Doctor Who did actually evolve when it came to the Sylvester McCoy era, but it was too little, too late, and the BBC ended up pulling the plug for Doctor Who for the next 16 years. There were some brilliant moments as well. I liked the moment when Ace realized that the house was actually the same Gabriel Chase that burnt down in Perryville, and it was revealed that Ace actually burnt down the house herself. And there were some scary scenes as well, such as Light showing his powers by turning Gwendolyn and Mrs. Pritchard into stone. And fun fact, that was actually the last ever seen filmed for classic Doctor Who. Ace's near mental breakdown when she was in this room with all the stuffed animals, not the cuddly teddy bears, like literal taxidermy dead animals in the room. And she was pretty much having she was having a nervous breakdown before Gwendolyn finds her, but then Gwendolyn was still under Josiah's control and was ordered to kill Ace. And Sophie Aldred acted that scene brilliantly, and I think she acted the part one cliffhanger quite well was when she entered Light's ship and she encountered one of the husks down there, and she was pretty much cornered by one of them, and that was a very scary cliffhanger. I also like the ending when the day was saved and the Doctor and Ace were literally the only ones left in Gabriel Chase, and the doctor asks Ace if she wishes that she burned down the house, and Ace responds that she wished she blew it up instead, and the doctor was like, wicked. I mean, even though that scene was actually changed at the request of McCoy, because the doctor was meant to have said, that's my girl, but then he changed it to wicked. I think that worked a lot better, in my opinion. Because it did show how well the doctor and Ace get along. And speaking of which, the acting, which was really good, Sylvester McCoy was quite good as well, and I can tell he really enjoyed filming Ghostlet, and he even said that this was his favorite story to film. The Doctor's manipulative side is really starting to become the more dominant personality, and he does this by tricking Ace into taking her into Gabriel Chase. But then, obviously, Ace probably might have had some memories of something, but then she didn't realize what it was until she heard the name Gabriel Chase, and then so he does this by landing the TARDIS inside the house. And he was having Ace look around to check the surroundings, and then like a few bits of madness happens, and then the penny drops towards the end of part one, and Ace realizes that the house is indeed Gabriel Chase. Yeah, so the Doctor is obviously doing this for a reason, and then I assume that this reason would have been explained properly in season 27. But in this story, he wanted to try and figure out the evil that Ace had sent back in 1983. He probably thought it was Fenric, but then it actually wasn't. McCoy and Aldred actually do aid in making the story work. Confusing plot aside, and their brilliant chemistry together really did help, because it actually does analyze the relationship of the Doctor and Ace, with how Ace was pretty much telling him off for tricking her by taking her to Gabriel Chase. And when Ace does pretty much briefly forgive him, but then it does set the scene for the following story. And Ace is definitely starting to catch on to the Doctor's manipulations, and I think that's what makes this scene and that scene in the following story much more powerful. Even in scenes in the story, he was actually quite good. He interacted well with the other characters, and I liked how the Doctor was able to notice what was going on with the house and did his best to stop it. He didn't need to manipulate anyone else, so to speak. And there was some good humor from the Doctor as well, and I liked how the Doctor actually quoted from the Great Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, when the Doctor said that you don't invite your ancestors over for dinner or something like that. And you also like the scene where Josiah called him smug, and the Doctor took it as a compliment. Sophie Aldred was brilliant, and I do think that Ghostlight is one of her best performances as Ace. And Ghost Story is a story that takes a look of Ace's past in terms of her character development and how it aids that. And this is done by having the Doctor and Ace go back to Gabriel Chase to try and understand the evil that Ace had noticed, which caused her to burn down the house. Although Ace didn't reveal that she herself burned down the house, but then she was kind of implied earlier. Ace didn't really say it was her that burned down the house until she mentioned it to the Doctor. But it was revealed that she burnt down the house because her friend Manisha was killed in a racial attack, and I assume that the Doctor was helping Ace by facing her fears, and this was pretty much Ace's own storyline this season, coming into terms from her fears from the past, the present, and her future fears. And obviously, Ghostlight looks at the past fears, Quest of Phrenic looks at the present fears, and Survival looks at her future fears. The Doctor did do that, but he was also trying to understand what caused her to burn down the house, which was Light's displeasure about evolution, and the displeasure pretty much dispersed amongst the house. So that pretty much influenced Ace to burn down the house after Manisha was killed. And I think there were some great moments as well from Ace, especially that scene in part 3 where she had that nervous breakdown with the stuffed animals in, and how she told the Doctor how she wishes she blew up the house instead. And I think that scene as well, like Ace was having a nervous breakdown, and it was played by 20th century like sirens like playing, and this was pretty much the scene when I'm pretty sure Ace probably got arrested for burning down the house. I think she was probably caught, and she was pretty much saying, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." It was a very emotional scene as well, and I think it was very well acted. And I also find it funny how Ace decided to put on the usual because Ace didn't really want to conform to any feminine sort of aspects. Although she did wear a skirt a few times, but in this story, she actually changes into like a tux or something. But then afterwards, and then the next day, I think she, because of everything that happened, she actually slept until 5 in the evening, and the doctor actually lent her a dress for her to wear, which Ace didn't seem to have an issue wearing. But then she looked good. I mean, she also looked good in the tux as well. But I do like how Ace is able to express herself in the story, even though she doesn't actually wear her trademark bomber jacket that she pretty much wore for a vast majority of her time in Doctor Who. Sidecast, and I thought they were quite interesting. First off, we have Redford's Fen Cooper. He was a hunter who said that a bright light made him mad, and he was taken to Gabriel Chase to be cared for, and he claimed that the bright light had wings. He was manipulated by Josiah by thinking that he had to assassinate Queen Victoria because he had received an invitation from her. He kind of healed and he formed a relationship with Control, and at the end of the story and after Light had been defeated, Control, and Nimrod decided to travel the universe in Light's ship. I really liked his character. He was quite interesting. He did make a bit of a dirty joke about Control changing her dress and said that he would get a woman out of her dress or something. Then we have Nimrod. He was in the Neanderthal that was transported by Light into 1883 and was a butler at Gabriel Chase. He saw the alien survey team that Light had led and was taken as part of Light's catalogue of life. Josiah found him and became a butler, and he accidentally broke the membrane that was keeping Light inanimate, which resulted in him becoming his old Neanderthal self. Oh, and him and his tribe actually worshipped Light, and they saw him as a god of some sorts. And at the end, he travels the universe in Light's ship with Redvers and Control. Then we have Ernest Reverend Matthews. He went to Gabriel Chase to speak to Josiah in regards to Charles Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, and he didn't really believe in that because he's of course a reverend, and obviously Christians do have the belief that we were all made from Adam and Eve or whatever. You know, well, not whatever, but then or something like that. But then he was turned into an ape by Josiah and was put on display. Then we have Mrs. Pritchard. She was the wife of Sir George Pritchard and the owner who was the owner of Gabriel Chase. Her and her daughter Gwendolyn were hypnotized by Josiah, and they believed that Mrs. Pritchard was the housekeeper and he was in charge of feeding the guests that Josiah had locked away. The doctor found the locket and showed her who she really was, as well as Gwendolyn as well, but then they were turned into stone by light. And then we have Gwendolyn. She was Mrs. Pritchard's daughter. She had been hypnotized into thinking that she was Josiah's ward and was made to kill her father. She was ordered to kill Ace, but then she was shown a locket with her mother inside by the doctor, and she was turned into stone by light whilst her and her mother were grieving with what had happened. And I think there was indications that she could have been Ace's special friend of the week, because at the start of the story, the two decided to change together, and they're literally behind the partition screen changing together, and that is not, and nothing ever comes from that ever afterward because of the plot. And obviously Ace's own issues as well. Then we have Inspector Mackenzie. He was a police officer that was initially sent to investigate the disappearance of Sir George Pritchard, but he was put into a 2-year stasis by Josiah. He woke up thanks to the doctor, but he was unaware that he was sleeping for 2 years, and he had when he was quite hungry as well, but then because of being locked away for 2 years, but then Light actually turned him into primordial soup. And lastly, we have Control. She was a member of Light's survey team exploring prehistoric Earth. She was locked away in the ship by Josiah, and her isolation actually made her stir crazy, and her desire to be free was accelerated, and she wanted to be like a proper Victorian lady. Once she was freed, thanks to Light, she evolved and looked more ladylike and more human. And when Josiah was stopped, he was taken prisoner. Her, Redvers, Fen, Cooper, and Nimrod decided to travel the universe. I liked his character, and I read that her name was actually a pun because she was literally in control. And we have the villains. First off, we have Josiah Samuel Smith. Initially called Survey, but he evolved into the human Josiah because he was involved in Light's survey of Earth in his prehistoric era, whilst Light was gathering his catalogue of life. Whilst Light was immobilized, he lived in Gabriel Chase and stored the ship in the cellar and hypnotized Mrs. Pritchard and her daughter Gwendolyn in wanting to train Rivers to become an assassin. When he wanted to take over the British Empire by having Redvers assassinate Queen Victoria by using an invitation that was sent to Redvers. But it was stopped when Redvers decided to not do it anymore, and Redvers chose to have control as his companion instead of Josiah, which obviously made Josiah quite upset, and because of this, Control actually turned him back into his unevolved state and was taken prisoner. I think he was an okay villain, but I think the whole plot of him wanting to assassinate Queen Victoria was a bit strange. Big bad of the story is Light. He was the leader of the survey team that was exploring the universe and making a catalogue of life, which is why the Doctor called him an evil older than time itself. The Doctor released him at the end of part 2 after Nimrod had actually broken the membrane that was keeping him in stasis in hopes that he'd stop Josiah. He was slightly different than the others and evolved quite differently as he took on the form of an angelic human with glowing yellow light and was capable of very dangerous powers like dismembering humans, turning them into stone, and even turning them into primordial soup. He also travelled at the speed of thought as well, and despite looking like an angel, it was a big contrast to how he really was. He was a frustrated, stubborn old man who hated change and believed it all to be crap, and his initial plan is he wanted to eradicate all organic life, but when he realized that change was inevitable and he didn't know that he actually was evolving himself, he tried to stop the change from happening or his evolution from happening, but then he ended up killing himself, and his displeasure was the evil that Ace had sensed in Gabriel Chase when she was a kid, and it was because of Light pretty much killing himself, and his displeasure was literally spread throughout the house. Light was a very good villain. He was quite funny as well, but then he was a very dastardly villain. So on to the fault. I think obviously the story was quite confusing, but I understood the message I was conveying, thanks to my own reading and my analysis. But then the way it was told was a bit too complex, and I think Ghostlight does make some Moffat stories when he was a showrunner and storylines in his era look more understandable. It's alright to have some complexity, but then it does kind of feel messy of how it was actually explained because Ghostlight was a three-parter and they were just literally just telling the story without any explanation as to what the plot was actually about. So I think I think the pacing issue pretty much ruined that. And I think if Ghostlight had a fourth parter, maybe it would have fixed things a bit. But in terms of the explanation of the plot, I think it was Mark Platt had actually intentionally not explained anything. But then I do think that if it was a little bit of an explanation, I think things would have been a little bit better. But overall, I think Ghostlight is a fun watch. Not if you're not too engrossed into the plot, because it does have some elements that we do see in the revival, such as beings being taken from the past into their own future and immersing into the world and vice versa, and of course, the companion being more centered into the story. Now, I do enjoy Ghostlight, and I would give Ghostlight an 8 out of 10. My next review will be The Curse of Fenric, the penultimate story of classic Doctor Who, and this is where the Cotman Master Plan starts to peak and always starts to come to a head. So thanks for watching this review of Ghostlight. Please let me know what you think of this story and this review. Sorry about the lost points again. And please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned for the future videos about the Cotman Master Plan and the Scream reviews, which will be coming up fairly soon in the next couple of weeks. And until then, I'll see you later.